This morning I'm going to start out by, I know we've all kind of beat the dead horse on the whole Hurricane Irma stories. We've told them all. I didn't get to tell anybody mine, so I'm going to tell you real quick. And it's not exciting either, but listen to this, okay? I know, first of all, before I say this, there is this secret thing between people who stay and people who go. I've been in Florida long enough to know that. It's somewhat like what you experience on the playground with the bullies, and you people who stay are the bullies, by the way, who like to make fun. No, I know this, and so, because you're thinking this already when I start to tell you a story of us evacuating the hurricane. But we did, okay? So we evacuated, and I had good reason. I got a little girl who's real sensitive to stuff, didn't know how that would play out, and have a mom in poor health. And I thought, man, what if there wasn't air conditioning, Need to get her out. And so we did. We evacuated, okay? And we evacuated early, and as on the way out of town, we stopped by some friend's house, and they were nice enough to look up real quick the route and to tell us that, your usual 6-hour trip to Atlanta is going to take you 12. And it's not going to take 12. They're wrong, is what I'm thinking. But anyway, we get on the road, and we head out towards the freeway. And I'm going to go under the freeway to play it safe and like zigzag up like that. But as I approach the freeway, it's free-flowing. So they were wrong. So I get on the freeway, and we start heading north, right? And we get up to the 75, where it comes in, and just a little past there, gridlock. It's just stopped. It's a parking lot. I don't do well with that. I don't do well if I turn right out of McMullen Booth and the stoplight actually catches me. I'm just going to go ahead and take another right and try to figure that out. I don't like to sit still. And so same thing, except you got 30 minutes between exits that day, to figure out whether you were going to get off or not. But I surely decided I'm getting off of the freeway and going to go some other way. And so we get off, I think it's like 44, where it heads up into Viernes. And we stopped there for gas because there's also like everybody's frantic and gas stations are out, right? We got gas, like extra gas, but we wanted to make sure we're topped off there in Inverness. 15-car wait, get to the front, pump, pay, all that. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, you know what? We just changed mobile carriers, and I'm so spotty anywhere off of the freeway that I'm probably going to lose service, which means I'm probably going to lose GPS as well. And so I called my brother real quick and said, hey, man, would you mind sending me some of those old school like MapQuest directions, like the step-by-step directions? Not a map, like directions. So when I'm off the freeway and I'm out in the middle of nowhere, at least I'll know where I'm going when my GPS goes out. And he did that, so I wait, bling, pops up, and I've got directions. I'm good to go. And so we chart a course out in the middle of nowhere. And as we get out there, we're not far up 19 when all of a sudden, more gridlock, more traffic jam. It's just stopped. And my wife is driving in the vehicle ahead of me, but she makes it through a red light that I'm stopped at when I happen to notice a detour sign to the right. Cool thing about detour signs is the way they're designed is you follow a detour to the right, and then in a left-hand turn, right-hand turn, left-hand turn, another left-hand turn, and you're usually back on course, right? Problem is, that's the only detour sign I saw all night. It was just the one taking me off course. And my wife's ahead of me, and we don't have any contact because the phone service is indeed out. And so I'm going out, and it's just going and going and going. I'm still heading further and further east, and I'm like, man, I got to go back north somehow, to meet up with where I know she's supposed to be when she starts cutting over. And so I see a road, looks like a legitimate road heading north. So I take that left-hand turn and start heading north. And after 6-7 miles, that road turns into a dirt road. I'm not scared of dirt roads, but that usually doesn't mean something good if you're trying to pass through, And but we did the dirt road, and it was a blast. But the dirt road's going, this way and that, like all kinds of. And I don't know if I'm going north, south, east, or west, after a while on this dirt road until finally it pops me out on the road that I know I'm going to catch up with Kristen and I did, and we got all together. That was the whole story. See, it wasn't that exciting, but here's the deal with the story. It relates a lot to the way we are with life. We're so accustomed to having our directions, and our GPS. When I went to Thanksgiving, headed out, I didn't really know where I was going. I knew like the general city, and we started heading that direction. 30 minutes into the drive, I said, maybe we ought to go ahead and GPS it. I didn't worry about it, right? Because I know right there at my fingertips, I've got it. I've got the next turn, but I can also flip down and have 5 next turns after that. I mean, it's all right there, and I'm used to having that. And even when we get out in the middle of nowhere, we're used to the signs, like the detour signs. But what if there's only one detour sign, right? And you don't know where the next turns are, and they don't show up. That's scary for us. And I realize it's a lot like that for us in life. And in the way that life is, and particularly life in the faith, because the way that God gives us directions, He so often gives us only this very next direction. And you say, well, cool, God, let me flip that down for the next 5. After that, I at least want to know where I'm going. But it doesn't work like that with God. So often, it's only that very next step. And for that matter, like I said, we pulled over, got gas before we even headed out any further. Well, a lot of times with God, too, when you're heading off in a direction, he's giving you the next direction only and not the whole map. And then also, he's not told you that there's going to be any stops along the way for any provisions, any gas, right? You kind of wonder, where's that going to come from? Whether we're talking about like a job change and whether or not you have what it takes to do it, or whether or not you're going to have the camaraderie with your coworkers there that you had here, or whether you're talking about engaging in some sort of circumstances and you realize it's going to take resources, it's going to take people to help do it, but God doesn't tell you exactly where that's going to come from. He just says, well, go, very next step, that's it. Or you look from job to job and say, well, this job had upward momentum. I was going to grow with the company. This job, I don't see where that is or how that works. God, just what's the next step after this? Where am I going with this? And so oftentimes, God doesn't necessarily give us that, Well, I think for all of us, I know it's at least true for me, I think probably for you too, I have this deep-rooted longing for adventure in my life. And even though I like to know where I'm going, if I had to be honest, deep down inside, there is this longing also just for the unknown, for the spontaneous, exciting things, And I believe that's something God put in us, although it's just kind of hard as you grow up. It's hard to embrace that. I mean, man, when I was a kid, when I was a youth, I would have headed off out into the middle of nowhere without directions, without a phone, who knows, maybe without gas, and just been like, cool, this is awesome. I don't care. It's just an adventure, right? But as an adult with responsibilities, I got my mom, I got my kids, we're in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden, it's a whole different context. This adventure in the context of adulting, right? But I believe that we still have this deep desire for something more exciting, this ability just to go. And we're going to talk about that a little bit this morning. It's what I call in the church us having an on-the-go faith. Because oftentimes God's going to call us to do some things, call us to go some places, call us to go to some people or engage some circumstances that we're not completely comfortable with, and we certainly don't know how it's going to turn out or how we're even going to accomplish it. But he likes to call us to that and give us only one step. And we're going to look at what that looks like in a couple of stories. The first story is a story about an encounter that Jesus had, and you're welcome to turn with me and look at it if you want. It's in Luke chapter 17. I'll probably read through really fast, so I'll be hard to keep up with anyway, but if you want to go there, definitely do. Luke 17, and Jesus is coming into a town after a long journey, and in verse 11 it starts like this. It says, on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance. I don't know if you know what lepers are, but leprosy was a big bad thing in Jesus' time. It was a disease that would eat away at the skin. So there would be skin lesions all over a person. It would be like their flesh is just melting off. The best thing I have to compare it to, at least in my mind, the way my mind works, is like zombie movies. And so I can't help but think that Jesus walking up, maybe it's even in the night, I don't know, but he's walking up out of nowhere, dusty sandals and his boys, and they come up, and there is 10 guys standing there with their flesh melting off, just standing there, right? I think it's creepy, maybe, but these guys had to be out at the edge of town. They weren't allowed to be in town. At one point, all of them had gone to the priest. The priest had declared them unclean, which means they had to be quarantined out away from the people. They had to go to the edge of town. They have to stay there. That way everybody else doesn't get the sickness. The fact is, they're going to die with it. It's just the reality. So these 10 lepers are standing out there, and as Jesus came up, they lifted their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. He wasn't probably wondering, like, in what way do you mean? Is it financial need that you have? He wasn't wondering. I mean, these guys are, And so they say, have mercy on us. And it says, when he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were cleansed. As they went, they were healed completely. And as I look at the story, these lepers, like I said, they've already been to the priest. They were told, get out of town. Don't come back in town. Don't go near anyone. Hence the reason they were standing at a distance when Jesus came up, right? They weren't going to get close. They weren't going to approach Jesus. They were going to stay at a distance and holler out, Jesus, Master, have mercy, But they weren't going to go back into town. They certainly weren't going to go back to the priest. And here Jesus says, all right, guys, go back to the priest. They have to be thinking, like, we still look like zombies. No, I'm serious. We can't just go to the priest. We'll probably be killed because we've been told to get out of town. But what the reality is, they didn't think at all. They just acted. They just did what Jesus said, and they began going toward the priest. And when they did, what happened? They were healed, completely healed when they went. And, a lot of times, Douglas will like to say to us, are you really waiting on God? Are you at the point where God is actually waiting on you? Like God's told you to do something. That business idea that's just, you said it was a godsend, but you haven't done anything on it. Like, are you really just waiting on God, or has God already showed him what it is, and he's just waiting on you? Because the reality is, if these guys had stopped and said, hey, can we have a sidebar conversation real quick and talk about this, the realities of going back to the priest and what that might mean? If they had stopped and done that, they'd not been waiting on God. God had already given the order, go. And when they listened and just went, that's when the healing happened. That's when this powerful thing happened in their lives. I think that's a lot of times the way it is with us and God. He loves to give us just that next little piece. And when we do it, it's amazing what will happen. And I like scavenger hunts. Do you like scavenger hunts? Scavenger hunts are fun, but there's something peculiar about them, if you ask me. What is it that makes a scavenger hunt a fun game as opposed to some sick joke? Right? I mean, just like, hey, go look for this thing, and here's a bunch of clues, That could be a sick joke, except that there's a plan for finding the clues. Anybody ever actually planned the scavenger hunt? You've been the one to hide the stuff and to give the clues? You've done that with your kids or grandkids? It's a blast. I did that for years with youth ministry, and I get to hide all this stuff, places, and then I get to give them clues, and then I get to see how excited they are when I'm standing there saying, okay, on your mark, get set, go. And they know they're going to look for something cool. Brian hit it, and I like to get crafty with the deal and make it real interesting, and they know that. And they know when they find it that whatever I've hidden is going to be something awesome. There's going to be some big reward, and it's going to be awesome. And so it's a blast watching that happen. I feel like God's the same way with us. The reality is that while it feels sometimes like, come on, God, why would you only give me this little bit of knowledge as to what's next for me? I want to know so much more than that. And I can take a step, but I mean, it feels like it'd be a lot easier to take a step if you tell me more of what it looks like, And can we trust God that what he's got in store for us is super cool? It's not a sick joke. There's a plan. The plan's what makes the scavenger hunt a game, not a joke, right? And in fact, about God, he's never short on plans and strategies. Whenever you trust him, there's always a plan. There's always a strategy. There's always funds. There's always resources. There's always abilities and powers that you need. There's favors and relationships when they're needed, and there's strength and fortitude when they're needed. God's never short on any of that. And he's always taking care of his own. And so when he tells him to go, he provides. And so when you look back through the scriptures, you see countless evidences of this in the lives of his people. Abraham and Isaac. Abraham was told to take his son Isaac up on a mountain and to sacrifice his son. It was God that told him to do it. And so he took his son and he went up on a mountain and he bound his son and he was prepared to sacrifice his son when God provided a ram in a thicket out of nowhere. But Abraham had faith. He knew that God was going to provide. He just knew it. And so he followed and he did what he was told. Elijah, the prophet, told a widow woman who was destitute and about to eat her last meal to go and to find all the jars that she could to bring them back to her house, empty jars, and begin filling them. When she had one little jar of oil, to begin filling these big jars with the oil and just keep filling, which would be ridiculous. And the widow woman could have said, well, what's the deal? I mean, pots aren't worth that much, or is the value of pots going up anytime soon? Is there some cool investment that I'm making here with this deal? But she didn't. She just went and grabbed pots and brought them back and began filling until every one of the pots that she had gathered was filled to the brim, and she could take them and sell them, and she could make money for her family and provide for her family. Because when she acted in faith, God provided. Moses, leading thousands of people. I mean, he goes and tells these people, I'm gonna save you. You refugees, I'm gonna take you out of this bondage in Egypt, and you're rescued, And they surely say, well, cool, Moses, like, so what's next, kind of thing. And he's like, well, I don't have a facility to house you, or anything per se. I don't have food or anything like that. Best of my knowledge, we're going to head off in that direction, right? Thousands of people. And they're like, that direction? What's in that direction, right? Well, I don't know, you go about 40 years that way, and there's something, I mean, they're going to be out in the wilderness. They're going to be out in the wilderness with absolutely no provisions. Yet Moses acted In his leadership, he acted and led, and God provided all the way. He provided a pillar of fire by night to lead him. He provided food right out of heaven, just falling to the ground. And he provided water struck right out of a rock. He provided healing when they were sick out in the middle of nowhere, and he provided for these thousands of people consistently for 40 years in the wilderness because Moses acted on faith. And David was this little kid, a little shepherd kid, who walks up and sees this ridiculous situation where there is a giant bullying and tormenting the Israelite army. The army is petrified. They're not about to move with this giant there. And David steps up and says, well, I'll fight him. Little kid with a slingshot and some stones believes that God will do something through him, and he steps out and he kills a giant. Right? Or Noah, who's told by God to build a humongous boat in the middle of the driest, nastiest drought you've ever seen. And everybody just laughs at him, like, are you kidding me? And he says, oh, there's going to be a flood, right? God told me. But he acted on faith anyway, and his entire family was saved. That's just the way that God works. He always asks us to do something that's just a stretch of our faith. It's beyond what we can see or understand. It's beyond what we feel we have the ability or resources to do. It's beyond us because it's him, and it's part of his plan, and his plan is awesome. And when we step out, he provides. He provides accurate directions and successful battle plans and ultimately victory when the odds and the armies are stacked against us. Like with the Israelites in a vast desert wilderness, he provided food and water and guidance and healing for thousands of these refugees consistently for 40 years. He's made cowardice stutterers into sought-after speakers and world-class leaders, and he's commissioned an actual terrorist to go and become the greatest missionary the world's ever known, the Apostle Paul, killing Christians, and then all of a sudden he's out winning the world for Christ. He's given destitute servants favor with kings. And he's made a great nation of a couple of old folks in their 90s who've had no kids, but he says, you're going to have kids. Not only are you going to have kids, but I'm going to make a great nation out of your family. And God comes through. And he's given a man, Samson, single-handedly the strength to rip apart the temple of his enemy. And he's given protection to 3 guys that were thrown into a furnace that was raging with fires over 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And they walked out of that furnace without a hair on their head singed. That's the God we're talking about. And so when we talk about the plans that he has, and when we talk about like, hey, God, I'd like to know more of the plan, or like, where's this going to come from? Where's that going to come from? Or like, how am I going to do this with the abilities that I have or don't have? We're talking about a God who has it all together. This is not a sick joke. This is an incredible adventure, full of spontaneity, full of the unknowns. But the cool thing with God is the unknowns are even better than we could hope or dream, right? So when we go down this road of this faith on the go, we're never short excitement and adventure, purpose or pleasure, freedom or spontaneity. There's always fulfillment and celebration. There's always friendships and camaraderie. And so I believe, like I said, that deep inside of us, there's this longing for that. And I believe that for pretty much every longing we've got, there's a reason. Most every one of it points back to God. And this one especially, he has a plan. We're going to take a look real quick at 3 stories that intertwine. In these stories, we're going to see how God speaks and how people go, and how when they go, it affects other people as well. Because our stories are all interconnected. God's plan for your life is part of God's plan for my life, and my life is part of God's plan for your life. It's all interconnected, and so we have a responsibility to each other. So we're going to look at Acts chapter 10 and 11. I'm not going to read any of it because it's a lot, but I'm going to real quick sum up 3 stories. Check out how they work together. So there's this guy named Cornelius. He is a Roman centurion, which means he's a Gentile. That means he's not Jewish, right? And he has a encounter with God where God says, okay, Cornelius, I want you to send for the Apostle Peter, the head of the new Christian church. I want you to send for him and have him come to your house to speak to a bunch of people. Which is preposterous to think that would ever happen, because Peter was born a Jew, a devout Jew at that. He would never even intermingle at all with Gentiles. And of course, this guy, Cornelius, is one. And so he listens to God, and with this faith on the go type deal, he goes ahead and sends 2 servants and 1 security guard and says, go get Peter. All right. Meanwhile, Peter is up in his room, lays down for a nap, and has this ridiculous dream. Like, it's far out weird. But the gist of the dream is it convinces him that he ought to go and speak to the Gentiles. As devout a Jew as he has been and now Christian, it's against everything in him to go and do this, but yet this dream is so vivid and so crazy that he's convinced he must go speak to the Gentiles, right? When this knock comes on the door, and this knock is, of course, the two servants and the security guard from Cornelius, the Gentile, who says, Peter, come with us to this home of Cornelius. And now, before the dream, Peter would have said, who's at the door? Some Gentiles. And shoot him away, right? But he had this dream, and so he's like, absolutely, well, let's go. And so he's on the go, headed out to Cornelius' house, while Cornelius, again, I said it's preposterous to think that even though he's already sent for Peter, it's preposterous to think that Peter's actually going to come. This is crazy. But Cornelius believes anyway, and he acts, and he goes ahead and he gathers a crowd at his house, okay? So he's got a crowd of people waiting when Peter knocks on the door with the servants and the security guard, and everybody welcomes Peter in and asks Peter to begin preaching. Peter has become, since he spent all his time with Jesus, since he's seen the miracles, since he's seen him feed thousands of people, and since he's seen him crucified but come back to life and then raise up to heaven with God, Peter has become this ridiculously fiery preacher. I mean, he's passionate as he could be, and he just preaches and preaches and preaches. He often preaches to Pharisees and talks to them about, hey, you're the ones that crucified Jesus, but that Jesus you crucified came back to life, and he's up with God now. And he just really hammers it hard when he preaches. So he sets into one of these sermons, right, faithfully, just even though these are Gentiles, and he does not believe, by the way, he doesn't believe that they can receive faith through Christ. He doesn't believe that, but he begins preaching anyway. But yet, just no sooner had he gotten started preaching, then all of a sudden there is a screeching halt to the service because the entire bunch of the people there went ahead and believed. They hadn't heard the message yet, but they just chose to believe. God moved on their heart, and they decided that Jesus is God after all, and they would give their lives to him, right? So there's this crazy story. That's one piece of the story, okay? Park that. That's number one. Number two, up in Jerusalem, this is the hub where Christianity is coming from. There's all these new believers in Jerusalem. When they begin being persecuted, I mean, people are going after them for their lives, and so they have to split town. They prayerfully go in different directions where they believe God is calling them to go, okay? Some of these folks went down to these two cities called Phoenicia and Cyprus. I like that, Cyprus one. But they go down to Cyprus and Phoenicia. In Cyprus, they're preaching to Jews when a bunch of these Jews begin to believe and they become Christians. They believe in Jesus. And so these new Christians from Cyprus head out to try to make an impact with their lives. I like this. New Christians from Cyprus head out to make impact on, okay. So they head out from Cyprus. They go to Antioch, all right? And in Antioch, there's what they call Hellenist Jews. That means these guys, they're Jewish for sure, but they don't practice the cultural piece of Judaism because they like more the Roman Greek culture. That's their deal. They're kind of the black sheep of the Jewish community, okay? So they would be mixed in like with the Gentiles, for instance. And when these new Christians from Cyprus go and preach in Antioch, well, all of a sudden, all of these people in Antioch believe and they become Christians. Now, they wouldn't have thought this is possible except for what just happened with Peter when Peter realized that the Gentiles can become Christians, right? So he sends word up to Jerusalem. They find that out. Now, this deal happens down in Antioch. But at any rate, the church in Jerusalem says, well, we need to send somebody down there to check that out. So they send Barnabas down. Barnabas comes down to Antioch, says, for sure, this actually happened. Yeah, these guys are believing. They're full-fledged believers now. And in fact, we need to do something. We need to help them start a church here so that they can grow and they can prosper. And park that. That's number two. Meanwhile, there's this guy, Paul, we've talked about. Remember the commissioned terrorist? He was commissioned by the government to go and to kill Christians. Well, Paul is on his way to Damascus to kill Christians. When he has this blinding light experience, Jesus himself knocks him off of his horse and says, Paul, why are you persecuting me? And Paul immediately recognizes who it is. It's Jesus, and his life is changed forever. Not only that, he loses his eyesight. But Jesus tells him, going into Damascus, and he tells him where to go. He says, I want you to meet a man named Ananias there. So Paul gets up immediately and heads that way, faith on the go. Meanwhile, this guy Ananias is deep in prayer, and God says, Ananias, I want you to get up. I want you to go down the street to this particular house where you're going to meet Paul. And Ananias, shudders, Are we talking about the terrorist Paul who's coming here to kill Christians? And God says, yes, that Paul, go there now. And Ananias says, okay, Lord, and he goes. He goes. And so he meets Paul. He puts his hands on his eyes. He heals his eyes. He talks to him about Jesus' encounter. And Paul walks away, this ridiculously fired up believer who's ready to go and impact the whole world for Jesus. He wants everybody to believe. And so Paul gets up. He heads to Arabia. He's going to be busy doing the work there. And as he gets to Arabia and he's studying and he's teaching, all of a sudden he's run out of town from there. He's chased out of town. He's running for his life. He goes back to Damascus. Then he leaves there. He says, you know what? If I was the head of the whole persecuting deal, then why wouldn't I be somewhere pretty far up in this whole Christian deal? I ought to make a trip to Jerusalem, where the head of this outfit is, right? And so he heads up to Jerusalem. Same thing happens. He gets run out of Jerusalem. He's running for his life. Again, now he's in Damascus when Barnabas shows up to say, hey, Paul, I remember you from when you were in Jerusalem. You need to come up to Antioch. Something crazy's happened. Because Barnabas gets this idea when he's sitting there in Antioch. He's like, we don't know what to do. I mean, we know how to reach and minister to and grow Jews who've become Christians, but what about these guys? They're different. And he says, I know, that crazy Paul guy. I mean, he's a crazy nutter. He can get in here and make something incredible happen, right? And so he goes down there, and Paul says, yes. Paul, out of faith, goes up to Antioch. Antioch's what's known today in all of our history books. It's known as the cradle of Christianity. It's where it all came from. It's where the greatest missionary in the world, Paul, this is where all his missionary journey started, right? And it's really hard, if you look at the timeline of Christianity in general, it's really hard to even figure out how in the world you and I here today would know about Jesus at all if it weren't for Paul and for what happened in Antioch, right? Now, all these things are intertwined, though, are they not? Like, when you think about it, I mean, if Cornelius had said yes to God and sent for Peter, but Peter had not said yes to God and would not come, then the people there at Cornelius' house would not have believed. Word wouldn't have gotten up to Jerusalem about the believers being Gentiles and all that, right? Which means on down the line, if they hadn't received that word in Jerusalem, then when this happened down there in Antioch, I mean, if the people from Cyprus hadn't said yes and gone to Antioch, but then if the people in Antioch weren't given a church because they didn't go get Paul, but Paul hadn't had that experience where he said yes and went to Ananias, but if Ananias, maybe if he didn't say yes and he didn't go to Paul, then Paul wouldn't have been prepared to go to Antioch. Do you see what I'm saying? And this whole cradle of Christianity? I didn't lose you, did I? I'm sorry. Okay, but what I'm saying is, this is really important. Our lives are intertwined. I mean, there's probably somebody here that in the near future, you're going to say yes. You do not believe that you have what it takes to work with children, but you're going to say yes to work in our kids connection, and you're going to be working with my kids there, and you're going to make an impact on their lives, which is going to impact my life, and then I'm going to come back in here and impact lives in here as well. I'm saying we're connected. Do you see that? And so you saying yes to what God's calling you to do affects you saying yes to what God's calling you to do. It affects every single one of us. And so today, as we look at this, I'm going to look at one more quick story. And this is a story about Jesus. And then I'm going to apply this to all of us. I think there's something, a lot of times I'll say, maybe this is for some of you, the rest of you can take it or leave it. This is for all of us, okay? Real quick, we're going to look at a story. Jesus has just fed thousands of people. His disciples are with him, fed thousands of people. Like I said, just a basket of food, and he turns it into a bunch of baskets, overflowing, tons of leftovers, feeds thousands of people. He heals all these people as well. There's all these people who can't walk, now they can walk, again. There's all these people who can't see, but now they can see again. So Jesus has just done all kinds of miracles, healed people who were deathly ill, now they're completely well. And the disciples have watched all of this. These are the 12 guys that Jesus had handpicked to follow him, to learn from him. And they've just seen all of this. And Jesus pulls them back away from the crowd, and he has a conversation with them. And he throws out this icebreaker opening question, and he says, this is in Mark chapter 8, he says, who do the people say that I am? He asked them that question. There was no delay in the answer. They all knew it because, people are talking all around. This guy over there is doing miracles. He's feeding tons of people. He's healing tons of people. There's all this stuff. People are coming out by the droves to see it for themselves, right? And they're talking. So the disciples know. They say, well, they're saying you're John the Baptist. They're saying you're Elijah, or maybe like any one of the prophets, really. It was a quick answer. And so then Jesus does a follow-up question, and he says, but who do you say that I am? You. And there's crickets. It's quiet. It's a hard question. It's a loaded question, but it's a hard question too. I don't know. The fact that it's hard means that they've moved past believing that he's John the Baptist or Elijah or maybe one of the prophets. That they know that. They could have just said, well, we believe about the same, but they didn't because they believed differently, but nobody had an answer except Peter, who finally speaks up. And he says, you're the Christ. And this is true. But the Bible gives us this little bit of information which is so very important. It tells us that Peter didn't say this just because Peter knew this. It says he was influenced by God to say this. That means that Peter didn't truly, fully know what he was saying. He didn't understand the brevity of that phrase when he said, you are the Christ. He didn't totally get it, but he said it. And this established for these guys a pivotal benchmark moment where moving forward from here, Jesus pulled back with them often. And he began teaching them. He wasn't teaching them as he taught the crowds. He was teaching them the ministry. He was teaching them how to carry on the work that he began, how to do the miracles that he did and more. He began teaching them. Now, this passage reminds me so much of us as a church. We are this safe place for folks to come in and to explore the faith. And many of you have come in just that way. You've not come in because you're a Christian and you want some exciting church to go to, but you came in because I don't really know if all this is real, but I'd like to just explore it. And we're a safe place to do that. And so you've come in and you've explored. Some of you have come to this point here at Cypress where you're able to say, I can say Christ is Lord. Jesus is the Christ, like these guys did. He's my God. And for many of you, there's not much past that. You're like, I don't know. I'm not going to be quoting scripture to you and stuff. I don't know a lot about the Christian life, but I believe that Jesus is God. He is my Lord, right? You've crossed the line. For some of you, you crossed that line a while back. And like Peter in our earlier story, you just need this stretch of your faith. Like Peter's just sitting there praying and God gives him this go to the Gentiles thing, and it's like, whoa, hold up. That's a real stretch, God. First of all, I'm not Gentile, I'm Jewish. I don't know how to communicate with Gentiles, and I'm the communicator. There's a lot of missing pieces to this, God. But he stretches Peter's faith, and for some, that's what we need, is just a stretch of our faith. And still today, there's some of you who you've come to Cyprus exploring the faith, not believing yet, and that's still where you're at. You've been with us for a while, and I just want to say this, and I believe any one of us who've crossed the line of faith here today can tell you this from the bottom of our heart. You will never know enough. You'll never discover enough to be convinced and to say that you know who Jesus is. It's just not that scholarly deal that you can just figure it out and own it that way. It's really a heart deal that requires a lot of faith. And so just like these disciples who eventually had to come to make a choice and to say, because Jesus is acknowledging you guys are somewhere different than all of those people out there. The thousands of people that have seen the miracles and heard my teachings, you're different because you spent time with me and you're getting to know my heart. And now that you know my heart a little bit, who do you say that I am? And that's when they declare, you're the Christ, right? And so for some of you who have yet to cross that line, you've just been exploring, it sounds kind of crazy, but it's really that simple. You have to come to a place where you just decide. You make a choice to believe that he's the Christ, that he's your Lord. Now, it's a lot like, your job, for instance. When you finished college, when you finished your education, when you finished your on-job training, were you ready for your job? Did your education or your training at your current company give you all that you needed to know in order to do your job successfully? Not hardly ever, really. Does anybody have an experience where it did? But instead, you do the training, you do the college, you do the education, you're thrown into the workforce, and that's where the learning really begins, isn't it? And that's like the same for these guys. When they say, you're the Christ, he's like, cool, you've acknowledged it. Now let's really go somewhere with that, right? You're going to learn so much. It's something that they're going to grow into. It's something that we've grown into. It's something that if you're an exploring the faith person here today, it's something that when you make the choice to say, he's the Christ, and I'm going to go beyond exploring, I'm ready to dive in, you're going to discover a lot. And so my challenge for us today is simply this, and this is for all of us. If you are still exploring, I would urge you, I'm not going to push you, but I would urge you, you have to make a choice. He's the Christ, okay? For those of you who've made the choice and you say, I can acknowledge that, but I don't know much more, and I wouldn't say I'm like an experienced veteran Christian or anything, and I don't know if I'm capable of doing pretty much anything. You know what? None of us ever were. One time a friend came to me and said, Brian, you're going to start leading worship for our group. And it was a large group, and he wanted me to play guitar and sing. And I said, well, it is true that I have a guitar. That's it. I don't know how to play a guitar. I don't know how to sing. And he said, no worries, because you've got 2 weeks before you're going to start, right? And for the next several years, all I did was lead worship. Isn't that nuts? But you know what? God meets us where our inability exists. He meets us with the ability that we need. And for those of you who are new to the faith, and maybe you've been walking with God for a long time, but you still just consider yourself new, and that's great. You know what? Engage this journey in a way that allows your faith to grow. And acknowledge that your life is designed, as all of our lives are designed, your life is designed to impact others. And all of our lives are connected. The plan that God has for your life is connected to my life. Our plans are connected. And so for those of you who've been walking with the Lord for a while, I'm going to pray for us in just a second, but before we do, those of you who've been walking with the Lord for a while, could you just ask God to nudge you towards whatever that is that's going to stretch your faith? Something that's just a little bit outside of your comfort zone, maybe a lot outside your comfort zone, where you're going to say, God, where's the provision coming from? Where's the ability coming from? And how in the world are you going to do it? And what's the next step? You're going to have more questions than you do answers, but ask God, would you take me to a place? Would you use me in a way that'll impact others, that'll grow my faith, and it'll play a part of this bigger plan? Would you join me in prayer? God, we thank you so much for the grander plan that you have for all of our lives. We thank you that we're part of a bigger picture, that we're not individual and alone, but that, God, you have a plan for all of us that impacts all of us. So, God, this morning I just pray for those who have yet to believe, God, that you would bolster their faith to be able to just declare, yes, I do believe. You're the Christ. You're my Lord. You're my God. To allow their lives to begin to impact others and to be a part of that bigger plan. Lord, for those who've believed and yet would consider themselves sort of new believers and being newbies, they don't feel ready to engage the plan. God, I just pray that you would, again, bolster their faith and allow them to take that step so that their on-the-go faith would meet your on-the-go power in their lives. God, to impact lives and to be a part of the bigger plan. And then, Lord, for those who have been walking with you for a while, and our relationship's going deeper and further these days, Lord, we just pray that you would give us even a greater stretch of our faith. Lord, that you would point us towards that circumstance that we should engage, that place we should go, that person that we should go to. God, that you would use our lives to impact others for you. And God, ultimately, as we all do, that these faith actions would result in your plan for all of our lives. God, thank you so much for your faithfulness to us. It's in your great name we pray. Amen. Awesome. Y'all have a great weekend.